Welcome to Flourish-Meant, the podcast on living life as you are meant to, so you can flourish. Welcome, everyone. I have with me an amazing woman of God today. Her name is Bethany Jett. She's a former youth minister's wife and high school cheerleading coach whose first book was a dating guide for young women. She's a military wife to her college sweetheart. She's a multi-business owner, a mama of boys who loves planners, YA novels, and quiet adventures. She's here to talk to us today about work-home life balance. Welcome, Bethany. I'm so excited that you're on Flourish-Meant today.
So excited to be doing this with you. Thank you.
Yes, and you have a lot of experience and wisdom and need for balance in your very, very busy life. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that looks like to balance your work and home life from a Christian perspective and from a business owner's perspective and a mom's perspective? How in the world can you possibly balance all of those things?
I like to say that balance is a unicorn, right? It's that thing that doesn't really exist. We talk about it a lot. And I think really it's because nobody's sense of balance looks the same. So what's balanced for you is going to be different than what's balanced for me. And I think a lot of the mom life, the work life, like all of the lives that we have, all the hats we wear, I feel like it's a lot of times like on a seesaw. So it's really, sometimes you're not really getting the equilibrium, which is where the term, we're looking for balance, we're looking for like an equal, but I think there's seasons. And so sometimes the balance comes from a season where one side is weighted down with, maybe it's the work side. You've got a season where you have to hustle, you're in a book deadline or a project or starting a company where it's going to require a lot of hours. And then the balance comes on the flip side when you say, okay, that season is done. And now I'm moving into this season. And the trick is making sure you're not neglecting too badly everything else when you go into a season like that. It has to be intentional.
I love that you said seesaw, because I think that's what's frustrating to most of us is that we are trying to do everything at once. There's a term called multitasking. Are you familiar with that term? I think we've all heard it. I think that term lies to us. It lies. Can you talk to us about what multitasking can look like and what it cannot look like?
Okay, so I have been listening to memory expert and brand expert Jim Quick, and his last name is Kwik, and he's just fantastic when it comes to how to retrain our brains. And so when I listen to him talk about the science and all those things, and multitasking is one of them, I like to think of it, through the Christian worldview about how amazing our brains are and how God created us and wired us. And he was just talking about this in his book about how, we think that we're getting more done and we're multitasking, but studies upon studies show that we're actually more productive if we're focusing on something. It gets done better, sometimes faster, and then we can move on to something else. But I think multitasking looks a little bit different. If you're working, multitasking can be less productive because you've got too many things in your brain. But I think moms are great multitaskers because they can do multiple things at once, like a baby on the hip, cooking dinner, and then you're also talking to someone. But I think it's because you're engaging different parts of your body in different habit tasks, which is another thing that he was talking about, where, cooking dinner, sometimes that's habit forming. You're not thinking or concentrating really on the steps, or you're feeding the baby, or you're doing something as a mom that also has become part of a habit too. So really your focus is the other thing that you're working on. And we look at that and we say it's multitasking, but maybe it's not true multitasking, because really true multitasking is not good for us.
Exactly. And I think if you're doing something physical along with something cognitive, you can multitask. But if you're trying to do two cognitive things at the same time that require intentional focus, you are going to do what you were saying. You're going to actually be less productive, more distracted, and your outcome is going to be less quality.
Yeah, exactly.
So when we're talking about the mom with the baby on the hip trying to make a phone call, you are actually a work from home mom. So that is a whole nother ball game of having to balance things that are going on at the same time. I know for a while you were even homeschooling while you were working from home, which I cannot even imagine how you made that work. Can you talk about what that's like to be a mom and to work from home?
Yeah, the craziest time was the moment that you're talking about. It was a season. Thankfully, it was just a season. But in that time, we have three boys. My husband was deployed overseas to Afghanistan. We had just moved. I was homeschooling all three of them and going to grad school and started two companies. So balance was non-existent. So balance for us looked like, am I getting enough time with the kids during homeschool hours? Are those intentional quality time lessons instead of maybe more self-directed? It was more me directed. So I was kind of taking some quality time aspect with some learning aspects and mixing them together because the number of hours in the day is finite. And so I had to make the most of every single one of them. And it was a lot of sleepless nights, like staying up till 2 and getting up at, with homeschool, you could get up at 8 or 9. So it wasn't, that big of a deal, but it was definitely a season I would not want to go back to because it was so hard to do. But I think that kind of goes back to the beginning where it's an intentional season for a time. But I think really just making sure, what are my priorities and are those main priorities being met? And, with the family, when I was single parenting, because my husband was overseas, are my kids getting time with me? Are they fed? Are they learning? Are they being active? Like, what are the things I need to make sure they're doing in the day? And then once I sort of checked those off, it then gives freedom to say, okay, now I can move into the other things that I've got to do as well. And so I think that the lesson I learned from that is making sure that you're putting that family priority first, even if it turns into smaller hours during a season, but it was quality hours, even if it was shorter for a time. And then being able to then extend it back and moving back. So I don't plan to ever go back into a season like that. But I think, especially, when we're doing what God called us to do or created us to do, and we're kind of stepping out into that, there's always a time where it takes more of our time to make those things happen. And just know that it's not always going to be forever. It's part of that.
Yes. And some people do make that a lifestyle where they are burning the midnight oil and they are working long hours and they're not giving themselves enough rest and they're neglecting their families. And that's really easy to fall into, especially if you feel that this is your purpose, this is your mission, whether it's a ministry or a career, you can easily slide into the overdoing and underperforming when it comes to the things that are important, like taking care of yourself and taking care of your family. Can you talk about how to tell where those limits are and how to make sure that you are not pressing too hard into the overdoing, but you're still maintaining those, like you said, priorities, those spiritual priorities, those family priorities, those self-care priorities?
Mm-hmm. I call myself a recovering workaholic because I think sometimes workaholism is possibly the sin issue. It can be of the heart sometimes because it's too much of your time being devoted to something in neglect of something else. That's kind of my definition of that kind of workaholicism, which I think is separate from understanding that it's a season. And I think that I tend to really love that work aspect of it when you're building, and it was really hard to pull myself away from that. And so in, whatever area you're in, you want to look at the people who are winning, right? What are they doing? What have they done? What mistakes did they make? Because now they're teaching how to not do those mistakes too. And one thing I found in the business world was, an entrepreneur world really is what I'm talking about. The people who were CEOs who had made it, they've gone through the season of burning the midnight oil, like you said. And now they've sort of reached this next phase, or even they're 5 steps ahead. One thing they always talked about was morning routines, getting sleep, exercise, and diet. And as I started even reading articles on Forbes or Business Insider, where it was like CEO secrets for their mornings, they all protected that time. And some of them are, people say you're busier than certain people. Well, some of them are running these multi-million-dollar companies, and like they've got a lot of responsibility for people's incomes on their shoulders, right? Heavier weight than what I was doing, which is just a business for me that didn't require people no one was losing their income if I didn't do something, right? That's a heavy responsibility. And yet time after time after time, they were focusing on mental health, physical health. And I thought, okay, that's what I'm missing because I'm too focused on the work. I'm not paying any attention to what I need to do for me, which sounds so selfish, but it's kind of like pouring out of an empty cup. And the Bible talks about making sure that you're full. And so it kind of became a spiritual thing for me too, is if I believe that I'm doing what God's called me to do, but I'm not taking care of myself, I can't take care of my family. And then I can't do also what he called me to do because I'm wearing myself out. And so you have to be really careful about reaching that boundary line of the crossing over into too busy, too focused on what you're doing, and then neglecting all those things. And the one thing that I think helped me get started out of that was the app called Sleep Cycle. And it's free. And you lay your phone on your bed and it measures your, I don't know, like how still you are at night. But I've been using it for years and I was able to figure out what is my optimum hours of sleep that I needed just from knowing when I felt good in the morning or when I didn't, and just watching those numbers. And then I started trying to make that a priority. Like that was my number that I had to reach. And it took months and months and months for me to even be willing to do that.
I love that. That's so important. There's so much in what you just said that I want to unpack that just a little bit and talk about some of the things that are key that you brought up. You brought up the key of self-care and sleep. That's really important, and how that makes us a better instrument. We are working smarter, as people often say, not harder. And sometimes when we're working harder, we're actually destroying the instrument. So when we are the instrument that provides all of these things for our family and for our business and for our careers and for our ministry, if we're not taking care of that at least well enough to keep it functioning, then it will fall apart and it won't work anymore. And we'll find ourselves working more hours to get the same amount of work done. So it doesn't save us time or get us farther to work harder in many instances. So have you seen that true with your family life when you are trying to work harder and it's not really working?
Yes, because if my kids were younger, well, obviously they were younger when I was doing this because it was in the past. So, but they were mostly elementary going into middle school. And it was, I feel like our kids need us in different ways at different seasons. Now that they're entering the teen years, I can really look back and see how that's true. And then looking ahead. And now that I've got two teenagers and a preteen, it's almost like they need me mentally to be present more than they did when they were younger or when I was going through that season. I needed to be there physically to make sure they didn't choke and, jump off the staircase, banister, because that's something my kids would probably do. But I see now it's more, I'm more mentally drained parenting my children at this age because I'm having to try to outthink them because they're always trying to outsmart me and they're testing boundaries in new ways. And so one thing that I've had to learn and have decided then to do was to start scaling back. And so I think that when you're trying to figure out what your business is or what purpose is, or if you're an entrepreneur, you're starting a company, you kind of go big because you're trying to figure out where your place is in that business. You're going wide. And then I think as you develop more skills, you start going more niche, which we hear a lot, on the business side, like riches are in the niches, they say. And so that's currently what I'm doing now is my working hours are very limited these days because when I go pick up the kids or when they're home from school, I'm trying very hard to make sure that I'm not behind the computer screen, and I might be on my phone, but not if they need to talk or if they need me to be right there. Because if I remove myself from the evening routine, it's chaos. And when I'm there managing that, it works so much better for all of us. And so really I've had to do this incredible shift of when my kids are here, there's no working really happening, and creating those boundaries can be really difficult, but I'm seeing the fruit of it. So it's worth it for anyone out there who's still struggling. I'm still struggling with that a little bit. It's worth it. Keep going.
Yes. And it's not about the amount of time that you put into each of the pieces of your life. It's the quality of the time and focus and attention into which you put each of those pieces of your life when you're with your kids, to be fully present with your kids emotionally, cognitively, physically present, so they know that they are the priority in that moment. And when you're working on business, then you can focus completely on that without the distraction of when I'm done with this, I need to also talk to my kids, or maybe while I'm doing this, I need to try to also be talking to my kids at the same time somehow. And then nothing gets done well. So I love that you've talked about quality over quantity. That's really important. And when we get back from our break, I want you to talk about practical steps on how to apply these things of work-life balance in your home, in your life, in all the areas. What are some things that we can apply, some tools, some steps, some techniques that we can talk about with that? But first, I want to introduce you to something that could be a life changer if you are stressed out, if you're experiencing anxiety, as many of us are. I have a new course out in 10 minutes a day for 10 weeks. You can turn your life around. I have 15 experts on Subdue Stress and Anxiety, a new course available on Teachable. And you can access this course at any time for as long as you like. But those videos are meant to be seen in only 10 minutes today to minimize your blue screen time. So that reduces your anxiety right away. You get a downloadable workbook, you get a resource guide, and a ton of bonus offers from all of those 15 guest experts that are presenting material. It's a wealth of comprehensive information to help you overcome any stress and anxiety in all the areas of your life. I hope that you will take advantage of this and find it a blessing to you. And now I want to get back to the blessings that Bethany Jett has to offer here on Flourish-Meant today. Bethany, can you talk to us about some practical things that we can do to start making this work-home life balance work for us?
Yes. So the number one thing that I can recommend is to have some kind of planner system. So whether it's paper or digital, or I use a combination of both, then that is going to help so much. And then the second tip is to actually use the planner system and not just leave it on the desk. And I could talk about planners forever. And I think the third thing would be when you're mourning, and whatever that's going to look like for you. But, what is it that you can do in those morning hours when your brain is the freshest because you've just woken up? How can you maximize that time? And sometimes it's not work. And for me, it's not. It's all the other things that I can get done before I go into work mode, actually in that morning time. But it changes everything.
That's important. And I kind of knew you were going to talk about planners somehow. That's really your thing. You actually have developed some planners for writers and people who are in your industry because you absolutely are the guru of planners. So let's talk about what some practical things are that you can put into your life during the time that you're planning, because you need to plan self-care. You need to plan family time, not just work. There are other things that you need to plan. What are some things that people need to do to determine what must be on their daily schedule?
Okay, so for daily schedule, I like to think about looking at the person like kind of holistically, like the mental, spiritual, emotional, physical, and then going into the business, like the financial, like how can you manage all of those things? And so it's like, how can I work on all of those aspects a little bit every day? And so really in the morning is going to be the best time. And I know some people are going to say, well, I'm a night owl, and that's fine too. Like if that's where your energy is coming from at night, then lean into that. Like, I'm not saying you have to switch it. That was a night owl for a really long time, but because of my kids' schedule, I had to turn into someone who has become a morning person. So it can be done just kicking and screaming. So I know a lot of people will do their quiet times in the morning to kind of start their day, with the Bible, with God. Listening to podcasts and audiobooks is something that I've switched from. Well, I would always turn a show on in the morning just as I'm like maybe doing a tidy around the house, just so it looks a little bit better, or making breakfast when I got home after taking the kids. I just have something playing in the background. And so recently I decided to make a shift, like a habit shift from a show, which is kind of mindless, to a podcast or an audiobook. And that has kind of changed everything. I've already seen how I feel more productive going into the work part of the day after listening to something nonfiction. Typically is what I'm listening to Jim Quick right now, as I mentioned him earlier. And another thing too, so I'm going to plug him just one last time. in my master's program, we had to listen to him talk one of his TED Talks, but he said he tells his clients to not touch their phones in terms of like email or social media or anything like that within the first hour of waking up, because of the way that your hormones respond to, the pleasure receptors, like, oh, I've got likes, I've got comments, I'm getting into that, because you start in this peak in the morning, but then you go downhill. And so that's how you're going into your day, is on this sort of downward slope, because we've been in bed for an hour checking our social media and our emails and things. And it also lets somebody else determine the course of your day. And so that was a real mental shift for me. My morning is mine, which I had to get to the place where I was okay even saying that out loud. And then also then putting boundaries on appointments and client calls, which are important, but then saying, okay, I'm only going to do those within these hours, even if it means people are waiting 3 months if necessary. And then asking God for wisdom and discernment to know which things need to be prioritized over other things. So it's almost this constant shifting of things. And final thought, I call it permaflex, which means permanently flexible. So all of these things have to get done, but I can move them around at any time, unless it's like an interview or something that has to be done at like an appointment time.
Yes. I love to say that we can set our schedules in pencil and give God the eraser, because there's always going to be times when he shifts those things for us, and you don't want to miss a God appointment because you're too rigidly fixed in your schedule. So that's good.
Yes.
And I also love what you said about morning. I am so not a morning person. I totally believe that's why God created coffee for those of us who are not morning people and need to be awake first thing of the day. That is God's gift to the non-morning people. Some of us don't wake up with a chipper song like a songbird in our hearts first thing when the dawn rises. So I totally get that. But I do agree with you that what you do first thing in the morning sets the trajectory. It's like launching your boat from the dock for the day. Just a little shift can send you in a completely different direction that over the course of the day ends up being the wrong place altogether when you get there. So you have to pay attention to the things that you're doing and what they're causing, what they're triggering, the avalanche of things that it begins to cause to happen after that. So if you were to monitor what you do in the morning and how it affects your attitude for the day and change those things so that you're doing things first thing in the morning, especially if you're not a morning person, that will help you get a better handle on your attitude to set your mindset and to get your brain working correctly. Like you said, listening to those things that trigger the parts of your brain to activate them so that you can think and your neural pathways are charged and you're able to be more productive in your cognitive tasks for the day. Those things are super important, whether you're a morning person or not. I like to pray in the morning because I need coffee, and even more, I need Jesus. Otherwise, I'm not the kind of zombie you want first thing in the day. So I know that those things are important. I really appreciate you saying that. What are some other final tips that you want to make sure that people know about for making that work-home life balance work for them in their lives?
I do something called no call Mondays. And so it's also then protecting the Monday. So that's always such a busy day, but I love Mondays now because they're mine. It's my Monday. And so, we were in ministry for a really long time. So, church was Justin's job, and, we had to be there. There were responsibilities, and we're tired, after Sunday. And I know even now that he's moved on from ministry to a different job, Sundays is still, we've got church, the kids have youth group, you're doing things. And so you're still kind of, pouring out, even if it's in a different way. But then Monday comes around and it's, meetings and calls, but there's no time from Sunday to Monday to get back into that swing of things, especially if you're trying to take Sunday to rest, which is another tip, was really taking that one day for the week. And a lot of people choose Sunday in the Christian faith to do that, and really making that a priority, which is the thing I'm trying to do as well, and not being on the computer on the weekends. So really shortening those work hours. But having a no call Monday, which really means no appointments for business, means that I don't have to be in hair and makeup. I can take the kids to school. I can be in pajamas all day if I want to. And then I can kind of work on whatever is coming Tuesday through Friday. And so again, going back to that seesaw analogy, Tuesdays are crazy and stressful, and I'm exhausted afterwards, but so much gets accomplished on Tuesdays because Monday was a day to prep for everything. So there might be a lot of things happening on Tuesdays where, it's not ever a family day, maybe that's pizza night because there's not time to cook that day. That's part of the balance. Because guess what? Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, maybe it's a home cooked meal because you've already taken all the care of the appointments on Tuesday. And so I like to look at a weekly shift of what balance looks like for us as a family versus a daily. So always looking at a daily as well, but maybe expanding it and say, okay, what does balance look like for our family? And that can relieve a lot of pressure and then feelings of mom guilt and all those things.
Wonderful. That's really great advice, Bethany. And I know that people are going to want to hear more from you because we can't pack all of the great stuff that you have to offer in 30 minutes. So tell people where they can find you and access your books and what new things that you have coming out to offer so that they can connect and avail themselves of the wealth of information and expertise that you have to provide.
Well, my website is my name. It's BethanyJett.com, Jett with 2 T's. All my social media links are there. I'm on all the platforms and love them. And what's super fun is the latest book that just released is called Navigating Minefields, and it's a young man's blueprint for success on life's battlefield. So the first book in my career was for young women, like a dating and confidence book in Jesus. And this one is the written with Victoria Doerstock and for young men and raising boys. It's all the life advice, I want them to know and take with them. They're all taking books with them when they go to college forever. So
fabulous. That is so great. I'm so glad that you came on Flourish-Meant today, Bethany. This has been a wonderful conversation. I hope that all of you listening have enjoyed this and gained as much information from this as I have. And I also hope that you will avail yourself of some of the other podcasts you might also enjoy on Spark Media Network, like Raising Healthy Kids with Leanne Mancini and others. There's so many great podcasts on our network. And of course, I hope that you come back for the next episode of Flourish-Meant.